It can be unsettling to confront the idea that the object, whether it's a spouse, a partner, or a parent, is not only separate from you, but also has an inner world that's independent and different from your own. This realization is at the heart of that depressive position. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In episode 28, titled Stuck in Life, we explored a specific type of depression rooted in an unconscious identification with a narcissistically preoccupied caregiver, a caregiver who lacks vitality and a zest for life. The episode resonated with many listeners, leading to episode 39, where I spoke with a listener who recognized this type of depression in his daughter, who was struggling, by the way, to get out of bed for school. Since then, I've received even more questions about this topic, so I wanted to take this opportunity to dive deeper into the experience of being stuck in life. To do this, we'll need to introduce some new and slightly more complex concepts. Understanding these concepts, 1, the depressive position, and 2, pathological organizations, I believe will offer you an alternative way of understanding why you or someone you know might feel trapped, restricted, or limited in life. Let's explore what it means to navigate what I'm calling the depressive position, and how you may develop what is known as a pathological organization as a defense against pain and anxiety that's inherent in the process of mourning. Let's get right into this with some concrete examples so you have a clear picture in mind of what we are talking about. Can you picture this scenario? You or someone you know struggle with agonizing self-accusations, resentment, or constant fighting with a loved one. Or perhaps a significant relationship has come to an end, and you don't know how to get this person out of your mind and life. You don't know, perhaps, how does one successfully separate from someone, or why can't I seem to move forward in my life? All of these scenarios relate to an inability to transverse the depressive position. If you're feeling uncertain about what I'm referring to, don't worry. I'm going to clarify this now by introducing some psychoanalytic theory on the depressive position. And all of this, I think, will help clarify matters in your mind. So, what is the depressive position? And what role does getting depressed play in moving forward in life, you may be thinking? The depressive position is a state of mind where you have to confront and accept the independence and separateness of the object. In other words, a mental representation of another person. This realization comes with the painful task of relinquishing control over the object, the other person, allowing that person to be independent. In the depressive position, this realization involves recognizing that the object, and in a moment, I'm going to describe why I'm using the word object. I think that's going to become very clear to you as well. But for now, just think about this as the other person. Being independent, like that means that they have their own thoughts, feelings, and existence outside of your own needs and desires. And in fact, they may conflict with your own needs and desires. This understanding brings with it feelings of guilt, loss, and the capacity for deeper empathy and love. This must seem very strange to hear. You are saying, I know that my husband, wife, mother, or ex-girlfriend is a separate person or is no longer in my life. We broke up a long time ago. However, if you are still thinking about them, if you are still drawn to them or angry at them, then this is more complicated than it seems. Think about a current relationship, because we have to think, how does one develop a capacity to do these things that I'm mentioning? So in a relationship, let's think about what happens when you're telling a story and the other person has a different memory or perspective. Those who are struggling with narcissistic characteristics find this difficult to accept. They might disagree with that different perspective, interrupt the other person when they're talking about their experience of an event, insist they know what really happened, or try to convince the other person that their version is the correct one. In other words, your version is the correct one. In more extreme cases, you might feel annoyed or even angry, reactions that can escalate, as I discussed in more detail when addressing what's called narcissistic rage. All of this reveals on a deeper level that you may struggle with the notion that others have their own separate, independent experiences and viewpoints that are just as valid as yours. This difficulty can stem from an unconscious desire to maintain a sense of control or certainty about our own reality. If you cannot relinquish control, the goal, not always intentional or conscious, is to possess the object. See, here comes that word again, object. To possess the object. It can be unsettling to confront the idea that the object, whether it's a spouse, a partner, or a parent, is not only separate from you, but also has an inner world that's independent and different from your own. This realization is at the heart of that depressive position. So again, what capacities or inner resources are necessary for you to achieve this kind of recognition? To achieve, that's right, I'm saying it's a developmental achievement to get to this depressive position, which then sets the stage for change, for moving forward in one's life. As you may know, change is not easy because it involves accepting the reality of loss and the passage of time. If you're struggling, for instance, to get that person, the prior boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse, out of your mind, we can speculate that you're in a conflict between facing the reality of loss on the one hand and denying it on the other. Change in life inevitably exposes you to something new, unknown, and to some degree, this might be frightening. And yes, I use the word frightening, but I will elaborate on that. So just bear with me. Just try to entertain this thought in your mind, because your knee-jerk reaction may be, I'm not scared of that. This is why, in part, you may cling to something you know, despite the suffering that it entails. Development, moving forward in life, giving up familiar self-accusations or past hurtful relationships, all involve giving up something and facing loss. The psychoanalytic concept that I think describes this developmental achievement best is what we have been calling the depressive position. Melanie Klein, a renowned psychoanalyst, first introduced this concept in her work during the late 1930s and early 1940s. While this was a long time ago, many people within the field of psychoanalysis and certain areas of psychotherapy, like for instance, what you may hear of as psychodynamic psychotherapy, still find her theories valuable. The way I approach her ideas is to integrate them with more contemporary psychoanalytic perspectives, like those of Winnicott, Bion, object relations, and attachment theories.
Welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders, the podcast where we help you become a great leader. I'm Dr. Scott Allen, and each week I engage with world leaders, senior executives, nonprofit trailblazers, and professors from universities around the globe. We explore all aspects of leadership: executive development, personal growth, bad leadership, women in leadership, decision-making, and so much more. Tune into Practical Wisdom for Leaders for critical insights to help you lead and live with purpose.
Just to be very clear, this idea of the depressive position entails giving up something. But let's be more specific, because I said something a few times now. What is so difficult and painful to give up? Is it actually that prior relationship? Is it actually that retreat to one's bedroom or even to the bed? Think about this for a moment. What is the most important thing for those suffering with narcissistic characteristics? What is so difficult and painful to give up? For those struggling with narcissistic characteristics, it is the grandiose sense of self, the feeling and belief in one's omnipotence. It is the belief that I know best, or I know what is true and what actually happened. I have a claim on reality, because everything that's right and correct and good, that lies within me. In part, moving into this depressive position entails giving up omnipotence and facing limitations. You may now be saying, but I know my limitations. And you might remember earlier I mentioned self-accusations and how at times you slip into the mindset of you're lazy or you're a loser or no one really loves you. But I want to make something clear. This is not recognizing limitations. This is simply inflicting damage on oneself, or what might be a sadomasochistic humiliation, which is either directed at oneself or others, oftentimes for not living up to some sort of ideal. So you don't live up to an ideal, right? Some image of perfection that you had in your mind, or the way someone should have treated you. Then comes this sort of these self-accusations. This way of thinking can lead to depression, which is very different than what we are referring to as the depressive position. And I'm sorry if this is getting a little confusing. I do apologize for that. But just to make the distinction between the two very clear, in depression, you are likely to suffer with anxiety and persecution, to harbor resentments, and to deploy manic and obsessional defenses that they all aid in denying the reality of loss. In the depressive position, this path leads to facing the loss, facing one's limitation, accepting and mourning these losses while experiencing painful depressive feelings. They are still there. There is some guilt there, not the persecutory guilt that I was just describing. There is some regret and there is some remorse, but you don't turn to yourself in that self-accusing way that I was describing that happens with depression proper. If I may return to the point I made earlier, successful development occurs when someone close to you can have a mind, an opinion, a memory of their own. And here's the critical piece, that's different from yours. A really important point in the depressive position arises when the task of relinquishing control over the object has to be faced. And now you could see probably, I said this would become clear, why I refer to it as an object. Because if you possess this other person and they cannot exist like with having a mind or an opinion of their own, they're not a whole person. That's sort of some of the language we use in psychoanalytic theory, but they're more like an object, which means someone or something that's there for you, but not in their own right. The earlier trend, which aims at possessing the object and denying reality, has to be reversed if the depressive position is to be worked through and the object is allowed its independence In other words, if it's allowed to turn into a person, then we can use that term. Let me remind you of an example I gave that illustrates this point. In episodes 9 and 10, I spoke about trauma-bonded relationships and gave an example of a guy whose relationship came to an end multiple times. I'm thinking about this example now because when he pulled away and she wanted him back, despite knowing it was not a healthy decision, he took her back because she said, "You are the love of my life. I want to heal and grow together." After exploring what those words meant to him, not telling him he needs to get a restraining order or quote unquote, move on with your life, I said I would try to understand and listen for what he imagined would happen with this reunion. Were there thoughts and feelings that he could omnipotently repair her, or somehow she has converted into the loving, accepting person that he so desperately and obsessively was seeking? When she broke off things again with him, after a couple months, he sent her a letter. In this, I demonstrated how he cannot let go. The need is compulsive, and the fantasy of loss is experienced as potentially catastrophic, leading to a fear of something, maybe inner emptiness. Who knows what? We don't know what, because the loss is often avoided. That's the whole problem. And that's why development becomes arrested or stuck. I have heard many examples like this. Take, for instance, the fellow who ends a relationship but remains in contact with this person, connected in some way, and has not told anyone that the relationship is over. This fellow gets upset or anxious when going out with family or friends because he thinks that they're going to ask about this woman. But what he does not think about is why he keeps this breakup a secret, and in a way, in his mind, keeps the relationship alive. He does not make the end of the relationship feel real by sharing this information with those closest to him. In short, if these experiences cannot be faced, a pathological organization may be called into play to deal with the conflict around loss and separation. What is a pathological organization? What does this mean? This organization has been described by various analysts, each emphasizing different aspects of it. Time does not permit me to go into detail now, but I want to emphasize that what they all have in common is a resistance to change. The pathological organization functions as a place to retreat if the anxiety around loss and separation becomes unbearable. I've discussed this organization and the work of Rosenfeld in prior episodes, but now I want to demonstrate how it plays a role in keeping you stuck in life. However, we can't cover that today, as we need to start wrapping things up here. In the next episode, I'll explore what this organization is and how to dismantle it so that life and development can move forward. To conclude, the depressive position offers a profound opportunity for growth by requiring you to face the painful realities of loss, separation, and limitations. While this process can feel overwhelming, especially for those with narcissistic traits or unresolved conflicts, moving through it is essential for true emotional development. However, when the anxiety around these realizations becomes unbearable, those struggling with narcissistic characteristics are not ready to relinquish the grandiose sense of self. That's what I had mentioned earlier, the omnipotent sense of self. So if you're not ready to relinquish that, that's when you may resort to what we're calling now pathological organizations, right? Another word for this, by the way, is called a psychic retreat. And that retreat may entail something as simple as not being able to listen to somebody else's opinion, which I gave a couple of examples of that earlier. But also it could be a real retreat where someone stops socializing, going to school, leaving their room, and perhaps even leaving their bed. The pathological organization is a defense which ultimately keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stuck in life. In the next episode, we will explore how to identify and dismantle the defenses of this pathological organization, because the word organization implies this is not just one defense, and that's why it's so complicated and requires a great deal of effort to begin to understand all the different mechanisms, all the different defense mechanisms that go into this organization and begin to dismantle them, paving the way for forward movement in life. As always, I encourage you to reach out with any questions or comments regarding anything that I covered today. I know these concepts are a bit complicated, but I felt it was really important to talk about this directly and to give you a much deeper understanding of why you may be stuck in life. If you want to learn more about narcissistic characteristics, please subscribe to this podcast. If you want to do an even deeper dive into many of the topics that I cover, stay tuned. I have a soon-to-be-released continuing education seminar series on all topics related to narcissism. If you want to interact with me directly, I'm presenting a paper on narcissism in October. I don't know if you would have listened to this episode by then, but if you do and you're interested, please feel free to reach out and I'll give you the details. And perhaps I'll even try to get them up on my website as we get closer to that date. These resources, everything that I've mentioned, the videos that I make, the continuing education, all of this can be accessed through my website, which is linked below. Okay, until next time, engage your mind and not your defenses against change. Okay, bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.